Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Wheeler and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e. In particular, I want to talk about one of my favourite adventures, and that is the Curse of Strahd. This is a Curse of Strahd Dungeon Master guide. It is not for the players, so if you are a player, this is not the right video for you, and I would suggest going and watching one of my other videos instead. We're going to talk about what do you do with character death in Curse of Strahd, and how can you use Dungeon Master creativity to make things more interesting. And certainly using dark gifts is one of those ways. So what do you do if the characters actually die when you're running the adventure, whether they are killed or die through some sort of terrible hazard? How can you actually deal with that? Now, character death can be a bit tricky, and a common event, unfortunately, when running something like the Curse of Strahd adventure, due to its sandbox nature. It's very, very sandboxy, therefore there's a high probability that they will step into a location they can't deal with. And the problem with the Curse of Strahd is that death is not a release from Barovia. One of the provisos for this particular demi-plane, you might say, this horrible place, is that no soul can leave it. It is always trapped in the mist. There's no way of actually escaping this location. So that makes things far more interesting. Dead people, characters, NPCs get their souls trapped in the mists, and it stays there. There are usually three basic methods that you can use for dealing with character death in any kind of adventure, and those are, as we all know, making a new character. So be it players' characters are captured, and the Dungeon Master just makes them captured so they can continue playing, which is always fine as well, nothing wrong with that. And the player can have their character brought back to life, so maybe the players have the resources available to bring the character back to life, or the Dungeon Master resurrects the dead character so they can continue playing. And one of the things I think that's far more interesting about this adventure is that character death does not have to be the end. In fact, it's far more interesting if they keep playing the same character, and really, really interesting. So unfortunately for the players, this is a horror story. It's not a fluffy kind of adventure, it's a horror story. There are consequences to death, and there are far worse things that can happen to their character than their character dying. They could find their character dies and comes back to life, and something else has happened that they weren't expecting, which makes things far more interesting for everybody at the table as far as I'm concerned. I used this quite a lot in my own adventure when I was running the Curse of Strahd. So you can give the character who's died a dark gift. This is a way of keeping the player's character still in the adventure so it doesn't sort of divulge into having to replace characters constantly. So how do you bring in another character when you're in a place like Barovia? It doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, are adventurers wandering through the mist constantly as the death toll increases? Or is this an opportunity to prove to your players that character death is not the worst terror or torture that can undergo their character's development? And this is an opportunity to make the character suffer, and suffer well. So there are, from the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurers League, there were a number of dark gifts that they suggested that you could use. So things like your eyes melting away so that you wind up with blind sight up to 60 feet. You can't see any further than that. Maybe this occurs when the player's character has some sort of injury to their eyes. Or maybe they drown and they grow gills, and now they can breathe underwater when they come back to life. For whatever reason. It's like Strahd does not want them to leave and wants to continue the torture for as long as possible. Or their body is cold to the touch, and that sort of implies that all sorts of horrible things have taken place. They are probably still dead, but they are walking around now. Or you get really, really funky, and at night, when the sun goes down, they turn into a ghost. And maybe they have some control over that. Another dark gift that you could use. Okay, so those are the basics that the Dungeons and Dragons Adventurers League provided, but there are more. So if that's not enough for you as a Dungeon Master, it's time to truck on off to the Dungeon Masters Guild website and look for the expanded list of dark gifts. And now you can really start to get a bit funky. Now, as I said, these are just, they're really just suggestions, so you do not have to use them. One of them is that you develop a forked tongue and you lie. Insects start to nest in your ears. Maybe you've been attacked or killed by insects, and this is now sort of you are their home. You become part bestial in some way. Maybe you were killed by a mongrel folk or some other creature in your endeavours. Your mouth, for whatever reason, just utterly disappears. There's no mouth. You don't need to drink or eat or anything like that, but you can't speak, and that means that communication is going to be a big problem. Social interactions are going to be very, very difficult. The mouth disappearing reminds me of the movie The Twilight Zone. There's a scene in that particular movie where the sister has had her mouth removed by the little boy who can make anything happen from just his sheer imagination. It's a terrible idea, but it was really impressive to see. What about you grow extra faces around your head? So now you can see in multiple directions, but you look very, very strange now. Or you start developing a hunched back. Maybe you fell from a long distance and your body is sort of, instead of dying, you develop this hunch as your bones are twisted and broken inside. All horrible and terrible stuff, I do realise. Okay, so those are dark gifts, but there are other things you can do. You can get very, very creative as a dungeon master. Things that I have used in my adventure when I was running the Curse of Strahd is I had the players, when their characters died, particularly when they were dealing with the coffin shop. You know what I'm talking about. The coffin shop is a bad place to go. I had their spirits or soul reside in one of the Barovian shell people. These are people who don't have a soul inside them, and so they wound up, in maybe a little boy or a girl or a woman or a man, all those sorts of things. I still allowed them to play their character as normal, but they looked different to what they were before. You can put in mechanical disadvantages, but I feel like that's sort of getting a bit too carried away. There's nothing wrong with doing that. One of the things I did sort of do when I was running my game is with dark gifts, as soon as they got the ability to start using something like remove curse, then I would allow them to be able to remove their dark gift if they wanted to, particularly if they started to stack up quite a few of them. Remove curse would remove the dark gift, and therefore they were back to normal. It meant that the cleric, you needed to have a cleric or somebody who could cast remove curse, was very busy, constantly removing curses. That's just the nature of that adventure. Or you could get really funky and go all Chucky on them, and maybe their body perishes and their soul resides in one of the Blinsky dolls. And now you've sort of got this doll that you now have to control. You are very, very small, but you have all of the features that you had before. Now, I think it would be absolutely hilarious, and I don't know that I used that particular idea, but I was ready to use it when the opportunity arose. I used the Blinsky dolls for lots of other things to scare my players. What about they get bitten by a werewolf, and you have them transform and suffer the curse of the werewolf? This I did play out in my adventure. And I did give them the opportunity to try to cure the werewolf player character, should I say, not player. The player's not going to be a werewolf, it's the player's character. I allowed them to do that. They did not do that straight away, and it wound up causing untold strife for them. Eventually they did, and removed the curse from the werewolf. But it really was problematic, and I actually had to bring in another character for the player while they were trying to deal with the mess that had been created. But eventually they went back to playing their original character, who was pretty much running around the world causing all sorts of strife as a werewolf. Really, really fun. I had a lot of fun with that. Maybe too much fun, actually. Or they get bitten by a vampire and transform into a vampire. One of the worst things you could do. I think with my group, what I did is I gave them the impression that they had been bitten by a vampire spawn and were becoming a vampire spawn. I did not tell them that they weren't actually a vampire spawn, but I dragged it out for many, many sessions. That's definitely a big bad one on me, but it was really funny. And I have to say that the players, when the reveal finally kicked in, they realised that the game had moved to a completely different level. They weren't angry with me, but they were quite shocked. So these are all the ideas that I have for what to do with character death. I really think that don't get them to play another character, get them to play the same character, just torture their character in some way and make sure there's some way they can get rid of the complication that's been put in place. Now, if you have any feedback or questions, put that down in the comments. I do have more videos on the Curse of Strahd, and there are videos for players and dungeon masters, all sorts of different topics. I have a Patreon account, so you can go and support me on there if you want to make sure I keep doing stuff like this. And I also have affiliate links down in the description for the book depository and Amazon, where you can go and buy stuff online, and that really sort of helps out the channel. Now, share, like, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to be notified when I go live and when I publish new videos. And if you're really lucky, YouTube might actually notify you. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.